Schools Forum. These are public proceedings and they take place live on the internet, and the meeting will be recorded for future viewing. It will greatly assist us if you will speak only when invited to do so. Members of the public are welcome to view the proceedings but should not make any contributions at this meeting. All members of the forum have had the reports in advance and had the opportunity, we hope, to read them, and the reports are also published on the internet. So we do ask, in terms of logistics, to help us with the technology, that all participants mute their microphones and their video feed when they are not speaking. And anyone wishing to speak should use the raise your hand button on Microsoft Teams. If that's difficult or you can't do that, you can always just unmute your microphone, switch on your video feed, and I will endeavor to recognize you. I'll try to keep a careful eye on that so that you will have an opportunity to speak. We do ask that you speak clearly and slowly into your microphone. And finally, can I ask for everyone's patience with the technology? If we have any hiccups, we will endeavor to find a workaround or to resolve those as quickly as possible. So thank you very much, everyone, for that. So into our agenda itself this evening, on agenda item 2, we're introductions. We don't have any introductions, I believe. If you'd like to know who's in attendance, there's always the participant button that you will find at the top of the Microsoft Teams screen, which you can click on, and you should see a list of names attending on the right-hand side. So move on to apologies. Item 3, apologies for absence, have been received from Susan Watson, who is a new member of the forum but is unable to be with us this evening. So Karen will note that. And Karen, have you received any other apologies?
No, Chair, I haven't.
Thank you. As far as I'm aware, we haven't been informed of any substitutes for this meeting of the forum. I'll just confirm with Karen if that is still the case. Karen?
Yep, no substitutes, Chair.
No substitutes, fine. So we'll move on to item 5, which is to approve the correct record of the minutes held on the forum on the 6th of October. And these minutes are often very comprehensive, which is very important for us for future records, but it can be complicated. So what I'd like to do is I'll go through page by page just for matters of accuracy, and we can swiftly move through that, no doubt. And then we'll go back and revisit any relevant sections for matters arising or any questions, comments people have to make. So let us begin with accuracy, please. On page 11. Page 12. Page 13. Page 14. Page 15. Page 16. And finally, page 17. So I think that we can accept those as a true record. And we'll now move on to any matters arising from these minutes. And again, we'll take them page by page. No doubt some matters will be dealt with throughout the course of this meeting, but we will point those out. Page 11, I assume there are no matters arising, but just for completeness. Oh, I do have someone, yes. Just trying to see who that is, who's raising their hand. Just bear with me one moment. Nope, the hand's gone down. Okay. Thank you. If you'll just bear with me, so I want to make sure everyone has a chance to speak. So we will move on to page 12 and paragraph 21. Just to point out, I'll point out just a few items here that I've had a chance to discuss with some of the officers before the meeting. In the first paragraph, there was a reference to information, particularly in relation to the domestic abuse and referrals team, And I can confirm that that will be forthcoming as and when there is something relevant to report. In the second paragraph, still on paragraph 21 on page 12, these are the matters arising from the previous minutes, reference to minute number 11. I know that some meetings have taken place, although not a collective meeting, and I'll just ask Jeremy Keeble, if you'd like to come in to comment on this. Jeremy.
Yeah, just to say, Chair, there have been a few preliminary meetings with some of the CEOs, but there's not anything of substance to report, and I'll obviously feedback as that carries on. Thank
you, Jeremy. That's helpful. Thank you. And the final paragraph in that section, section 21, we talked about the Dudley scheme for financing schools, and there are some items there that haven't, particularly to do with the capital scheme, that will not be covered in tonight's agenda, and we'll ask for that to be please put on the next meeting of this group. So the next agenda in January, if we could note that, Karen, for the next agenda. Okay, section 22. We had an item about minutes from the budget working group to be circulated to forum members, and I'm going to hand over to Helen to comment on this. Helen Ellis.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we've really thought about this in the sense of there'd be too many removals. So what we're suggesting is we've got Rebecca Cox reporting back this evening around budget working group. So I'm just asking Forum if we could just monitor that. So just to let's ask a head teacher from each budget working group to report back here to just give an update on budget working group, because as I said, to circulate the minutes, I feel that we'd be removing too many things out of the minutes.
Okay, thank you, Helen. I think, yes, the budget working group, there are some confidential items or some items of detail that can't be shared with the public. And this is a public meeting, so in terms of extensive redactions of any minutes, not making that worthwhile, we're asking that Forum trust the feedback that we've only really recently implemented, so we can see how that will work. And in addition to that, something that we have discussed at Budget Working Group and will continue to do so is to try to improve the way the members of Budget Working Group feedback and cascade key points of information, key points of discussion from Budget Working Group out back to townships, and indeed how Academy reps can also improve their communication with their colleagues across the Academy sector. So if with those two approaches to this, we're hoping that will address that item. Okay, great. Moving on to page 13. There was under the resolution, there are 3 items resolved there. Under the second one, we've mentioned already the minutes of Budget Working Group, and the third item, the Acting Director of Children's Services and Accountancy will be requested to provide further details in relation to the funding formula rationale adopted for the independent placements for non-SEN pupils, and an email has been sent out with that information. Okay, any more matters arising on pages 12 or 13? I'm not seeing any hands. So we will move on to page 14. Any matters arising? Rebecca Cox, please.
Hi, it's linked to the bottom item on there, and also it links back to that other one on 21. They sort of read as in all the chief executives of the borough's multi-academy trusts on item 21 on the bottom of page 14, arranged with multi-academy trusts. It's not all CEOs that are involved in that, and I do think that needs noting, because it looks like all CEOs are involved and they're not.
Thank you. That's an important point of clarification. Karen, if we could note that. And Rebecca, is that fine? Is that all you wanted to say?
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. The point of clarification there on page 14. Thank you. On to page 15. Okay, Rebecca Cox.
So sorry.
That's
I
okay.
just wondered if there was any more information on the discussion we had around the spend there. Said it would be considered.
Yes, would you, Rebecca, for convenience for everyone, would you please point out to which section on page 15 you're referring?
It's the fourth paragraph down. Comments made by the forum would be considered and noted. The final decision would be undertaken by the Acting Director of Children's Services. We talked about the use, didn't we, of the money?
Yes, I'm so sorry. I'm not seeing the paragraph. I'm just looking for that.
Chair, it's the last paragraph before resolved.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Okay, fine. Thank you. I'm so sorry about that. Yes. Okay. Helen, would you like to comment on this? Helen?
Yes,
you are.
I'm here, Chair. I'm just trying to work it through. Could I just have a couple of minutes just to work that through? Could we
Yes.
come back to it? Is that okay?
That's absolutely fine. We'll come back to that in just a moment. Okay, can I would like to, still on page 15, I'd like to point out on the fourth point under resolved heading, discussions undertaken in relation to exclusion will be provided at the next meeting of the forum, and we would like to add that as a future agenda item for our next meeting in January. So we will not lose that particular item. We will turn to that at a future agenda item. If to give Helen a little bit of time to gather her thoughts, if we could move to page 16 and 17 and any matters arising anyone would like to raise. 16 and 17, pages 16 and 17. Just. Okay, fine. So just back to page 15, the issue to do with decisions on the comments that were going to be made by the forum being considered. Helen, over to you.
Yeah, no decision's been made as yet.
So Karen does a great job at taking the minutes. So Karen, I'm sure that when you are making a note of that for our next set of minutes, if we can just be very clear about what that is referring to so that we don't lose that again and can, when a decision has been made, come back to it.
No problem,
Thank you.
Chair.
Okay, let us then, having completed the minutes and moving on then, we've approved those minutes and the matters arising. We're now going to move on to agenda item 7. And this is the feedback from Budget Working Group. And we're going to ask Rebecca Cox to feedback. And I believe she may be supported by Laura Jones-Moore. Perhaps Laura has already given her a tutorial. There was some complicated financial information, some of which we're going to be discussing throughout the course of this meeting, but I'm going to hand over to Rebecca for that feedback. Over to you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so during Budget Working Group, the first thing that we discussed was a November update from Jeremy Keeble, which was launched to everybody, heads, governors, elected members, and we had the strategy reinforced, the education strategy. We talked about inclusion. We talked about inclusive pathways being rolled out, and it was a comprehensive plan going forward for the education strategy. So thank you, Jeremy, for that. Item 2, we talked about the disapplication feedback. Simon Hickman, who is cited in the disapplication papers that were circulated today, reported back there were 86 responses to the disapplication consultation. All of them said no, which I think is slightly different to the paperwork that was sent out today. maybe we'll pick that up later. The local authority had been provided with a management action plan template, and that would have been very helpful if that had been circulated to them, I believe, from government prior to the consultation, but unfortunately it wasn't. But it's a very helpful document which they have subsequently used and shared that with us briefly during budget working group to help them plan forward for the local authority. The general feedback on the consultation was 4 points: that it was unclear on how the money will address the SEND challenges, the impact on budget and how the money was calculated, and unclear on how it would improve services in Dudley. Helen was very keen to connect with education to explain how the planning for SEND was going to be worked on going forward, and spoke of wanting quarterly updates for different sectors to keep everybody up to the progress of the SEND plan and the detail of what was happening. Already on the 26th of November, we've planned forward for primary head teachers to have an update about the SEND plan going forwards, which again is a real step forward and really helpful going forwards. Laura and Dawn then shared the SEND funding information, which is for mainstream and special schools funding. Currently, there is a matrix for funding SEND children, and it has been developed. It's version 8, developed over an 18-month period. The previous matrix framework was over 10 years old, so it's time that needed to be developed. During this time, it was realised that special schools and mainstream schools needed to be funded slightly differently, and so there is a different way that will work, mainstream to special. Special will be a provision-led model, and mainstream a matrix-led model. The matrix going from a level 1 through to different points, dependent on the need of the child, and that was shared with us. This has been trialled out in a number of schools. I want to say 200 children, not 200 schools, who have gone through the matrix. And when that has been run through the matrix, it did equate to an additional cost of 1.7 million. So a question was then asked at that point: if the new matrix is going to cost more, how will we fund this when we can't fund the current situation? It was then shared, a financial plan was then shared with us, and I'm sure Laura and Dawn, you can go into more detail about that. I don't know whether it's appropriate you do that now.
Yeah, well, just to say, Rebecca, can I just come in at that point, Chair, just to cover this point? Yeah, I think that's a yes.
Yes.
So we have got a detailed presentation at item 12, which will cover those slides in detail around the financial planning. So that will probably help in your feedback, Rebecca.
Thank you, Laura. And I think the feedback that Rebecca's giving now will be a very good preface, a very useful preface to item 11 and 12. So we can take it as a context for future discussion and some additional detail. Back to you, Rebecca.
So you'll hear about the financial plan there. We were also, and I'm sure that will be shared as well, the management actions that the local authority are putting into place to make a £57 million spending over a period of time up to 2027, can't even say that year, in order to reduce the deficit spend on SEND. And as I say, you'll hear the details around that without me going into that. There was then talk around exceptional funding, as exceptional funding will cease. It has ceased being awarded, but it will cease being provided for those who currently have it in place. So there were some worries from some schools who do have that in place to fund provision, that they may no longer have that funding come April 2021. Discussion around what will happen there, and there was a way forward put forward for the local authority, which was very welcomed. We then talked about the education worker in MASH and the fact that a job description will be circulated, which has been circulated, and feedback. They're waiting for our feedback on that job description very shortly. And that is my feedback from Budget Working Group.
Thank you, Rebecca. Well done. I think it was quite comprehensive, quite clear. Without preempting the detail that's coming in future agenda items, may I just ask if there are any questions on that feedback? We'll have ample opportunity to ask. I think that's Paul Lation, is that correct? Yes, Paul, over to you. Paul, if you would just unmute before you speak.
Sorry, Chair, thank you. Could I just ask Rebecca about she mentioned this 57 million from the council going forward to 2027?
Yes, there are a number of actions that the local authority are putting into place, management actions, and if they are put into place and they are successful, and that is outlined in the plan, then it will yield the saving.
Helen, would you like to come in?
Yes, please. It's in relation to what Laura said. We will be giving more of the detail further on in I think it's item 12, isn't it? It's the main body of the agenda, so we'll be giving you more detail.
Thank you.
Thank
you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Paul, and hopefully we'll be able to return to that with some more detail momentarily. And may I ask Chris Christophorou if you have a comment to make, please?
It's not really something that Rebecca can answer, it's more just a general question. So she mentioned the exceptional funding, that it ends from April 21. However, the schools within our trust, the funding ceased in April 20. So it's just trying to understand the rationale behind why it's continued for some and then not for others. I'm not sure who can answer that, but it's just more of a statement really as to why, I suppose, our learners have ceased to receive that funding.
Helen?
Yep. Okay. A decision was made earlier on in the year that secondary school exceptional funding would cease and primary would continue. This is all in light of, in terms of what Rebecca's just described and the conversation we were having at Budget Working Group, is all in light of the new funding matrix. So the funding matrix that hopefully will come into will be introduced next year. So it's not really replacing exceptional funding, but there wouldn't be any need to have exceptional funding because the funding matrix would enable us to calculate costs more effectively, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Just the one thing to feedback was that was never actually disclosed to us. I don't know if that was ever presented to anyone, and maybe it just didn't reach myself, but maybe just communication on that going forward if there are any changes from sort of a budgeting point of view. It makes it quite difficult.
Yeah, I think the communication could have been better, Chris. I will support you on that one. It was announced here at Schools Forum, but I think it could have been confirmed better. Yeah.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Helen. Brian Rowe.
Thank you, Chair. No questions. I just want to say thank you very much for the detailed, comprehensive report from Budget Working Group, and hope we get those every time we have a meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. That's good to have that feedback. Thank you, and well done to Rebecca. Thank you, Rebecca. Okay, let us move on to agenda item 8. We have a memberships update, and I'll hand over to Helen Ellis.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Okay, so really, could I just ask that the forum note the updated position, which comes in effect from the 1st of November, and could I just start you on point 7, where we've got one nomination, Angela Hannaway, to continue as primary rep. And then point 8, this is really good news. We've actually got somebody that's been nominated into the secondary school governor position, so that's really welcomed. And the lady Susan Watson. And point 9, could I encourage head teachers to try and encourage school governors to put themselves forward as for nominations for those 2 vacant posts. We've had vacant posts in those positions for a while now. So if I could really encourage head teachers to do that, I'd really appreciate it. So that's it really, just to ask the forum, just to note the report.
Thank you, Helen. That report noted with the plea for anyone who might be able to fill those vacancies to get the word out. Thank you. Okay. Right, we will be moving on now to agenda item 9, the Dedicated Schools Grant Projected Outturn, and this is our update, a mid-year update. I think this detail will provide a very useful context for us to discuss a very substantive item, agenda item 12, which is the disapplication proposal. So I will hand over to Laura Jones-Moore to present this item. Laura.
Thank you, Chair. So as Chair has just described, this is an update for you all. So it's based on information and data as at the end of September. So can I ask you all to turn to page 11, Appendix A, where you will see a table that demonstrates the financial position for the whole of the Dedicated Schools Grant. So the 2021 latest position, the latest budget, shows £266.2 million as a budget, and that includes the allocation for academies also at £114.2 million. So that's for 40 academies. What you will see is that there's a forecast outturn position overall of £278.5 million, giving rise to a deficit position as a forecast of £12.3 million across the whole of the Dedicated Schools Grant. Just to be really clear about that, that covers the in-year position, but also the brought forward deficit from last financial year. And that is further summarised for you on page 12, Appendix B. So if I can ask you to all refer to that now. So what this table does is it breaks that down further into funding blocks. So you can see that the schools block has no variance to budget, so we're not reflecting any under or overspend there. The high needs block is reflecting an in-year deficit of £6.2 million. That's after taking into consideration the school-specific contingency reserve and the decision that was made at the last forum meeting. If you add to that the brought forward deficit position from last financial year of 7.7 million, we are forecasting to end the year on the high needs block at 13.9 million. This will be covered in more detail at item 12. You can also see that the early years block is reflecting no variance in year, but there is a brought forward surplus of £1.1 million. At the moment, we don't have any additional data around the autumn term adjustments. We will bring that to a future forum meeting around the in-year sort of variance position. Excuse me. And then the central school services block is showing a small saving in year of £8,000 with a brought forward deficit position of a brought forward surplus position of 429,000. So in total, that takes us to a forecast year-end position with a surplus of 437,000. And that in total comes back to the 12.3 million noted in Appendix A. Just to note for everyone at forum, page 8 gives a lot more detail around the narrative and the reasons for the over and underspends. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. That was a helpful mid-year update. And just to repeat, as Laura's comment, the detail will be presented for item 12. Do we have any questions on this mid-year update? Okay. Thank you, Laura. And then that takes us now over to item 10, our delegated service options for 2021-2022, and I'll hand over to Stacy to present this item for us. This item will involve a vote, and when we come to that, I will explain the logistics around that. So first, over to Stacy to present this.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you. Right, okay, this report is just an annual report that we present to Forum with regards to the de-delegated services for next year's budget for 21-22. So if I could just draw your attention to page 15 of the agenda and page 16. It's just a reminder really that last year we had the discussion at Forum for those mainstream maintained members with whom the de-delegated services relate to, with regards to a multi-year approach really, rather than having to keep making a continued kind of decision. What we did was we took the proposals around the union facilities at time, and also the behavioural pupil referral unit to Primary Head Teachers Forum back in September 19, and also Budget Working Group back in November 19. And it was really the recommendations to Schools Forum back then that we consider sort of a 2 to 3 year approach. So Forum made the decision in January of this year to have an annual vote, and we have to do this as part of the sort of arrangements from the DFE as well. So what I would like you to do is sort of those members that are vote, which is in paragraph 10, to make those decisions shortly about those two services and whether we continue to fund those for next year based on the prior discussions that we had. A reminder as well in terms of paragraphs 15 and 16 is that we need to create a new budget for next year for the risk protection agreement insurance scheme for maintained schools. Now, we did prepare a report to come to Forum back in March of this year, but unfortunately we went into national lockdown, so we didn't actually have that meeting. But what we did do was circulated the report on the 18th of March to those members that would be eligible to vote, and they unanimously agreed to support setting up a de-delegated budget for next year for that. So really what we need to do, just for the record really for the DFE, is record that we are happy with those budgets for next year.
Okay, thank you, Stacey. Are there any questions before we proceed to eligible? Any questions? No. Okay, so in terms of the voting, as Stacey has pointed out, if you refer to paragraph 10 on page 15, we do have those members of Forum who are eligible to vote on this item listed. And what I'd like to do, just since in this virtual meeting, we want to make sure we're being absolutely clear for the record. I will call your name in the order in which it's listed. If you could unmute your mic, please, and give us your vote. In support, yes, or not, no. So if I can begin with Mr. McConomy, please.
Yes.
Thank you. Mrs. Finnegan.
Yes.
Mrs. Riley.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanaway.
Yes.
Mr. Rowe.
Yes.
Mrs. Belcher.
Yes.
Mr. Burton.
Yes.
And we've recorded apologies for Mrs. Watson. Thank you. Karen, is that all that you need? Stacey and Karen?
Yes, Chair, thank you.
Thank you. To item 11. This is also, I believe, with Stacey. This will also involve a vote at the end, and we'll get on to that in due course. So over to you, Stacey.
Thank you, Chair. Right, okay then. So this report is some proposals that have been put forward by the local authority with regards to the scheme for financing schools. So again, this relates to maintained schools for voting on the forum, and that's set out again in paragraph 15 of the report. So if I can just draw your attention to Appendix A, which is on page 23, and just talk through the changes that we are proposing to make this year and need schools forums decision on. The first point that we want to add is around de-delegated banking. We are proposing to include a couple of paragraphs here as guidance for schools in terms of the appropriate use of the de-delegated banking system. This is in light of a few schools actually using it inappropriately that we found. So this advice has come from sort of the Section 151 officer in terms of the recommendations there. So, you know, we would strongly recommend that this is put into the scheme just to give schools some added clarification there around what's appropriate use of that system and not. And then the next point is around the controls on balances. The first section there under point 3 on page 23 is around proposed changes to the balance control mechanisms. So what the local authority is proposing to do is currently secondary schools are allowed to carry forward 5% of their reserves at the end of a financial year. We are proposing to reduce that down to 3%. And then for nursery, primary, special, and for the pupil referral units, change their balances down from 8% as it currently stands down to 6%. And that is in light of the wider discussion that we're having around the deficit, the large deficit on the dedicated schools grant, but also to address the continued high balances in reserves, which are actually noted in paragraph, let me just jump back, paragraph 12 of the report. We had in excess of £9 million worth of balances at the end of 19-20 financial year. And then the third point in Appendix A is around the inclusion of a paragraph around the maintenance of uncommitted surplus balances. So again, this is just a bit of added information and best practice really, and tidying up the housekeeping there. The main point to note is that we tend to do all of these things anyway in terms of, you know, the reserves. Schools have to demonstrate they are for a specific purpose and that they are linked to, you know, the school improvement plan or have been approved by governors. And what we are adding now is point 2, just at the very bottom there, is around being spent within a defined timescale. So you will see that when we send out reserves forms for closing down the accounts for 2021, if this is approved, we will be putting in timescales there for schools to note when they will be spending those reserves by. So those are the 3 suggested amendments. If I take you back to pages 19 and 20 on the agenda, we just in paragraph 7, we issued this consultation out on the 25th of June, and it closed on the 18th of September and went out to all schools and stakeholders. We actually had 26 responses back from 15 schools. All of those schools were primary schools, and none of those responses supported any of the proposed revisions. However, all of the comments that were made by those schools were just in respect of the balance control mechanisms and the percentage changes that we were proposing. So I think that just adds a bit of context there. What we've tried to illustrate for forum to enable you to sort of make the decision, bit of context there, is in table 1. Obviously these changes would be applicable from the 1st of April 2020, so would come into effect for close down of 2021 accounts. So we don't have the balances for this year yet, obviously, because we're not quite there. But what we've tried to do is just illustrate, well, had we have had those changes to the percentages in place for the end of 1920 accounts, then these are potentially what would have been triggering those balances. As at the end of the year, we had 66,000.
Stacey, I don't know if you can hear me, but you've frozen. I wonder if Helen or if Laura can jump in. Helen?
I think we've lost Stacey. Laura,
It
could you?
looks-
Yeah,
Yeah, I think what Stacey was just about to say was that table 1 is for illustration purposes, and what we were trying to say was if we'd applied those the methodology that's in Appendix A, then it gives you an idea of how much funding would be recouped on that basis. So Stacey was just about to talk you through that, and you can see that at paragraph 13. Okay.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. So, Laura, is it your view that Stacey was just coming to the end of her comments?
Yes, she was. She's
fine.
described everything in Appendix A. So yes, I think now.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. So may I just invite if there's any questions before we proceed to the vote? Any questions? Okay. That's Angela Hannaway, please.
Hi, it's just to bring up really something that was mentioned in Budget Working Group, and that is, given that we're 8 months into this financial year, were schools, if this goes ahead, going to be supported with, if it's relevant to them, about having to change delegated banking or balance controls, or in the current climate, obviously there's been a lot of delays on anything related to building projects, including the local authority plans. So it's just to make that point again that was made in Budget Working Group. Should this go ahead, that our school's going to be given support who have currently got those mechanisms in place.
Okay. So making a plea for support if this goes ahead. Okay. May I bring Brian Rowe in, please?
Thank you, Chair. I am disappointed that it seems as if several responders were against this plan, because it seems to me eminently sensible what the authority's done. I remember a few years ago it was 16 million that was in reserves. Now it's down to 9, so it's going in the right direction. But I wonder how many of those responders who said no to this consulted with governors and talked about it openly at meetings, because I think there'll be quite a few governors who might have had a different approach. And it is very difficult if there's unspent monies. It's difficult to argue that school budgets are too low and you want more money and you need more money for various things if there's large numbers of reserves. And Roman 5, that paragraph, seems eminently sensible. What's wrong with that? If you've got some reserve, you have to justify it. It seems good. So I'm disappointed with the response, and I won't go along with it. I'll authority, I think.
Okay, well, thank you for those comments, Brian. We will come to the vote shortly. But may I please, before we do that, bring in Mr. Burton? Gareth, you're muted. I can't hear you. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, can you hear me now, Romney?
Yes, we can. Yes.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Romney, you may come to this, so please tell me to just park this if you are intending on doing so. But when I look at Appendix A, I see that there are potentially 4 different things that we would vote on, and I just want to double check that actually the inclusion of paragraph 5 will be separated as a separate vote.
Yes, Gareth, as far as I understand, if you refer to page 19, under the recommendation, section 6, A and B, there were actually 3 Roman numerals there. Those 3 points, I believe, are the 3 separate ones. Is that correct, Laura? Do correct me if I'm wrong.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Rebecca Cox.
Hi, I just thought I'd exemplify something from one of my head teacher colleagues. It does appear that this might be that you've got lots of money left over and you've got it in reserves. But for example, if I can give you a different example, one of my colleagues made significant savings throughout the academic year, really cutting back on staffing and really staffing to the bone. And what happened over the course of the year is they were managed to make those savings, which then at the end of the year resulted in them being in a going over the percentage. So that then would mean that they had that clawed back. And really, I don't think that would have been fair in that situation. And I know that didn't go ahead in the end, but that could go ahead. And because that head had made significant savings, I think that's when we need to consider things on a different basis. So it's not just all about you saving money in a big pot. It can be due to other reasons.
Thank you, Rebecca. Any further comments or points of clarification before we proceed to the vote? Okay. If colleagues would please bear with us, again, due to the virtual nature of this meeting and to be absolutely clear that we're recording votes correctly, we will take them one at a time, and I will ask for each individual to unmute and give their vote. So we're going to begin on page 19 under section 6 recommendation with the first point to vote, which is point 1, the inclusion of the delegated banking guidance. So that is the first point for the vote. We will separate them out. So if I could please have the vote from Mr. McConomy.
Yes.
Mrs. Finnegan.
Yes.
Mrs. Riley.
Yes.
Mrs. Hannaway.
Yes.
Mr. Rowe.
Yes.
Mrs. Belcher.
Yes.
Mr. Burton.
Yes.
And I believe we still have apologies, which are recorded for Mrs. Watson. Okay, moving on to the second item for the vote, which is under section B, point 1, revision to the permitted maximum value of reserves each school can retain under the local authority balance control mechanism. That point now, please, your vote, Mr. McConomy.
No.
Mrs. Finnegan.
No.
Mrs. Riley.
No.
Mrs. Hannaway.
No.
Mr. Rowe.
Yes.
Mrs. Belcher.
No.
Mr. Burton.
No.
Thank you. And the final point, the inclusion of paragraph 5 regarding the maintenance of a high level of uncommitted surplus balances. Mr. McConomy, please.
Yes.
Mrs. Finnegan.
Yes.
Mrs. Riley.
Yes.
Mrs. Hannaway.
Yes.
Mr. Rowe.
Yes.
Mrs. Belcher.
Yes.
Mr. Burton.
No.
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. Karen, have you been able to successfully record those votes?
Yes, Chair, I have.
Thank you. And I believe that that will conclude now this item. And we can now proceed to agenda item 12. We're going to have some input from several people, I believe, on this with a presentation before we get into a discussion and an ultimate vote from each member of Forum. So I'm going to hand over to Helen Ellis to begin the presentation for us. Helen?
Okay, thank you. Okay, as Remy's just said, there is a report. We're not intending to go through the report because I'm presuming that everybody's read the report. What we're going to do instead is do a presentation. So there are a number of us that will go through the slides just to ensure that Forum are well informed and we share the detail that sits behind each of the slides for you this evening. Okay, and they're in front of you. Sorry, Simon, could you just go back? In terms of the agenda, okay, these are the areas that we want to focus on this evening. We're happy to take questions as we're going along because we're quite conscious that there might be a lot of information and quite a lot of technical information here as well. So I want to be really clear that everybody has all the information as possible and and we answer questions as well as I said, as we're going along. Okay. Okay, so in terms of the summary, this is, so I think we've had a number of reports this evening, and this quite this falls into quite a good part really in terms of what we're trying to achieve within the local authority. And you'll all know, in terms of the high needs block, currently we've got a deficit issue. And we've had quite a bit of information this evening already, which demonstrates the issue that we're in currently. And it's really just to remind Forum that the high needs block is education funding. So what we're proposing this evening is the disapplication, but that's to help us support the debt deficit, but it is about the funding going back into the education pot. So this isn't about funding going anywhere else. So I really do want to ensure that Forum are cited on that. And it's just a reminder that we have got a plan and we need to work hard to address the plan. We can't keep the deficit the way that it is, because you'll gather shortly that if we continue to do nothing, the deficit will just keep growing, and we're not in a position to see that happen. So for me, it's just to remind the Forum of that. Okay, so in terms of moving on, okay, so again, I know that Jeremy and myself have shared the strategy, so I'm going to hand this over to Jeremy again, just to remind Forum members of the work that we're trying to do. Okay, over to you, Jeremy.
Okay, thank you, Helen. Good evening, everybody. I do apologise, some of you have seen this before, particularly some of our head teacher colleagues, but I just thought it's useful at the start of this just to set a context in terms of the rest of the presentation. So for those of you not aware, what we've done this year is we've actually put in place an overarching education strategy to underpin, overarch, however you like it, everything else that's going on in the local authority. And this has been rolled out across a number of groups, forums with heads, elected members previously. It's been to chairs of governors and various other groups within the local authority. And as it says on the slide, it's that overarching framework that holds all the other work streams and everything else that's going on in the local authority together. And we're now building quite steadily and quite strongly in terms of all the work within this framework. So it's built around 6 key principles, which some of you will be aware of. The idea of working within 6 key principles was essentially that we recognise there are quite a lot of multi-academy trusts across the local authority. And whilst we haven't got the influence to direct particular trusts to work in specific ways, what we're hoping with this is that we have a broad brush set of principles that local authority and MAT can work together in terms of the overall aims for the children and young people of Dudley, which is the whole point of this. So that's why it's based around 6 key principles. And if you've not seen these before, hopefully they will make coherent sense. So the first one is about, as a borough, taking responsibility for all that happens with our children and young people, so they all get high quality education. I don't think that's too contestable. And what we've done in the rollout with this and since is we've had a lot of meetings with heads and other bodies, and we're trying to build the real strong relationships with schools and other partners to take this forward. Obviously, it's quite important to set that up as a real undertaking, and even this afternoon I was in another meeting with secondary heads and we talked again about where we're at with this. So it's about that relationship building, so we're in a partnership going forward, that right balance of support and challenge. We're obviously conscious at the moment we're in a pandemic, and some of the things that we'd like to move a little bit faster on are not going to happen at the same rate, simply because we recognise, having been a head myself, heads have got a lot on their plates at the moment just to stay open in some senses and keep the children safe. So we are taking that into account, but the ambition to take full responsibility is still there. Simon, do you want to flick over to the second slide, please, or the next slide? So the next principle then is around inclusion. And we recognise that we've got some amazing inclusive practice across the borough, but in other areas there is work to be done. So you'll see when I get onto the very last one, it's about transparency and communication. But what we've started to do is give all of our schools a lot of the data about inclusion. Some of the schools have not seen any of this before. So all of our secondary schools and all of our primary schools and all of our special schools have seen all the data around. The irony is it's exclusion data that talks about inclusion, but that's just what you'll find if you Google Ofsted inclusion, it'll automatically come up with exclusion data. So there's just a little one for tucking away in your mind. But what the heads have all got and all of the schools have got is the fixed term exclusion data. So that's children that are sent home for a day or two, permanent exclusions, and the percentages in each school of the EHCPs. That's the Education, Health and Care Plans. And Tony will talk a bit more about that later on. We're also working a lot with our educational psychology service and some various, I've said this every time I've done this presentation, there's a group linked to the Police Crime Commissioners team called the Violence Reduction Unit, which actually a bit of a contradiction in terms because they're more around supporting schools and supporting the community generally, but we're engaging with them as a partner to roll out a lot of work around inclusion and wellbeing charter marks within our schools. So this is about helping our schools to recognise what they already do in terms of inclusion and build on that. The third one is about continuity, and I suppose this is one that feeds probably more directly into the rest of the presentation because we're aware that we are in a situation now where we are reviewing a lot of what we're doing. There's a clear need, I think, as a local make sure we are more joined up so that our mainstream schools, our bases, which are predominantly in us primary schools where we have specialist provision for children, for example, who need speech and language input, but also with our alternative provision, which some of you might remember used to be called PRUs in part, and our special schools. We're just looking at how it all joins up. We're looking at some of our special schools in terms of the designations, in other words, the cohorts of children they take. We're aware possibly going forwards we've got a shortage in terms of provision for children with social, emotional, mental health issues. But we're looking to actually do this in a coherent way. And if you look at the bottom bullet on that slide, that's one of the reasons why we need to move forward with a lot of what we're doing in a constructive, proactive way, because at the moment, the result of not having everything joined up, not having our special schools designated in the right way, does lead to us placing quite a large number of children out of the borough in costly out of borough provision, which isn't necessarily high quality in every case, and it isn't necessarily for children that have such complex needs we can't meet them. At the moment, it's just our schools are not designated appropriately in some places, and it's a capacity issue, and that's something we're very clear of and we do need to work forward on. Simon, do you want to flick over to the next one, please? Inclusion, as you'll see, is a theme through the whole of this, and reducing exclusions is part of that. This links into some of the things I was talking under bullet 2. We're rolling out a program of inclusive pathways, and what this is about is essentially being there for schools and academies when they get to that point where they're recognising a youngster is at risk of permanent exclusion, rather than just having a conversation and they're there, that's all right then. We're actually instead being able to put in some very proactive support to identify the needs of that child and support the school in keeping that youngster in school, because what often happens is a child that's excluded for one school tries again in another and they move around the system. We've got to reduce this movement of our young people. It's not a positive experience for a child to be excluded. It's something they hardly ever get over with, and it does have a massive detrimental effect on their life chances. So supporting schools with the resources at the right time will minimise and hopefully reduce in a lot of cases exclusions, both fixed term exclusions and permanent exclusions. Number 5 is about us. We're very aware that we've got some work to do as a local authority, and one of the things I've worked really hard on since I joined back end of May, starting of June, is making sure that the teams that we have to support schools are much more coordinated. So we've now got an education team that actually functions as a team. We meet every Monday, we go through issues, we talk about particular schools, we talk about the support we're putting in place for those schools, and then we follow that up. This goes back to what I said at the start, and I think 1 or 2 heads on this call have already been through the process, where we then have a follow-up call with them and their SLTs, and we talk to them about what we've understood about our support to be, how we might change it, what's working well for them. And again, it's all about partnerships and supportive working. And then the last bit, as I suppose, is what I'm doing now, which is communicate. And I think that's really, really important. I've done this November update now, as some of your colleagues on here, head teacher colleagues will know. We've already done this with special heads last week, primary forum last week, and secondary heads today. And it's just about keeping those channels of communication open. And the very last bullet, I suppose, is a proofing point, because there's a couple of other bits of work that are working through the decision sheet process and going to DLT this Thursday, where on the one hand, we've got to create some extra secondary capacity in Hales Owen, and that's been in consultation with the CEOs of 3 particular MATs and 3 particular schools. So hopefully we're taking through the process of a plan that the CEOs have actually put together in collaboration with ourselves. And also there's a dip in birth rates coming through in about 3 years' time, which is going to need a temporary reduction in PAN for some of our primary schools. And again, that's been done in consultation by sharing all of the data with heads before the summer, and the result of that is when we've got to those individual conversations with individual heads, they've gone fairly smoothly in the sense that the heads understand the wider context. So hopefully that's useful, and the intention of just doing this piece here, as I said at the start, is it just gives you a context for what's going to follow in the slides that come after me.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. I'm not going to spend too much time talking through this in detail, because it will be shared, but what we've had to try and do as part of the SEND programme is translate what Jeremy has expressed through the strategy and start looking at how we actually deliver that. So what the programme group has come to is a vision that is almost the foundation of what we're trying to deliver to support the children in the borough, but in a way that then is the foundation of everything that we do when we start looking at the demand over the next few finances. So as you'll probably go on over through the next few weeks and months, that this graduated model will probably be referred to a lot more, and it's looking at the schools and the support from a graduated perspective, rather than saying you've got post 16 or post 90. We're looking at, you've got mainstream support, which is including SEND support, partnership arrangements, and enhanced provision, which is what we're calling bases at the moment, but then into special schools and independent non-maintained provision. And I think the key thing is understanding that we're aiming to get the best fit to get the best support for the children for Dudley. I don't know, Helen, if you want to sort of expand on that before getting into the more technical demand information in the next few slides. You're on mute, Helen.
Thank you. I knew that would happen to me. It's as Simon's described, and I know a number of us have had ongoing conversations with heads in particular. What the programme does and what we're really trying to aspire here, as Simon said, it's just to ensure that our children get the best possible support, and it's about them being in the right place as well. So I know in the past we have had situations with some of our SEND children who have not gone into mainstream, gone down the specialist route, and that's not always been the right path for those children. So what we want to ensure with this is ensuring that our children do go down the right pathway. This is about being really aspirational. This is about being ambitious for our children. And as Simon said, what we're trying to do is articulate this and trying to have this ambition. So in reality, that where we've got the mainstream circle, that's where we want the majority of our children to be sitting with the right support.
Helen, I believe we have a question from Paul. Yeah. Paul Lation, would you like to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Helen, could you just explain the slide that's up at the moment under special schools, which I've obviously got a vested interest in? We've got special schools either DMBC maintained or other LA maintained. What does that mean?
Simon, do you want to answer that one?
Yes, I think when we're looking at the information, we've got children that are in DMBC special schools, but we're also funding EHCPs for children to go out of borough into specialist schools as well as independent non-mainstream as well. So what we're trying to say is that if there's almost cohorts of children that are in a special school that, because we haven't always had the places in borough, we've had to put them out of borough. So when we're looking at SEND as a system for Dudley, we need to include those as well, because they're all part of the cohort of Dudley children.
Thank you.
Does that answer?
It just doesn't read like that on the slide.
Okay, if it doesn't read like that, Paul, we'll look at that and we'll make sure that it's clear then, because it needs to be clear, and it needs to be clear so everybody kind of understands it. So we'll re-look at that one. Okay.
Thank you, Helen.
I think we have another question from Jodie. Jodie, would you like to come in? Jodie Colburn.
Hi, yeah, I think I'd just like to reiterate the point made by Paul there. In many of the discussions that we've had with the local authority over the last couple of months, over the last 12 months, 18 months, it has been very much around bringing those children that are potentially in those out of borough placements or in placements such as perhaps the Wenlock School back into the school system. So I think we do need to be clear on whether we're going to move forward with those children remaining in those out of borough placements and an acknowledgement and an acceptance of that and the costs that are incurred, or whether there is still that vision about bringing those back into the special schools that we currently have, based on the slide that we're currently discussing.
Okay, and thank you for that one, Jodie. I mean, this will be a graduated response, as we've described. I mean, we can't do everything all in one go, but the intention is we'll always have children that will have to go out of borough, because we will have children that will need some real specialist support that we won't be able to ensure that happens in borough. But the intention, and as I've described all along, the ambition is to ensure that the majority of our children are educated in our borough, in their communities. At the moment, we are in a position where we've got quite a big proportion of children out of borough, and that's not the way forward, really. As I said, we do want our children to be educated in their community. So but as I said, the ambition to do that cannot happen overnight, because there's an acknowledgement from the local authority, and again, these have been ongoing conversations with heads in particular, is that the provision currently in borough isn't sufficient, and that is an area of focus for us to ensure, and we'll talk about the demand management shortly. Simon will talk about that, is that we understand our cohort of children a lot more now. We've absolutely got the right data set. When I stepped into this position, we had no data. We didn't even know how many children we had on an EHCP. We have that data, we have better intelligence, we know what the need is, and we know what provision we need now. And as an authority, with the support, the collaboration with you as schools, it's about moving that forward now, and then trying to look at needs of children out of borough and how we best match the need to the provision. But as I said, that's not an overnight job.
Thank you, Helen. Jodie, I didn't know if you wanted to come back in, and then I've got Councillor Buttery. So Jodie, did you want to come back on that?
Yes, please. Thanks, Remley. I totally agree, Helen, and I think as part of our discussions, we have always said, haven't we, that there is always a need or a demand for a very small percentage of children to be educated outside of the special school estate that we currently have in Dudley, because of their very profound, extreme, complex needs. I do think, is there any kind of criteria moving forward in terms of which children will be placed in those out of out of borough or in borough, but not necessarily within the sort of special school estate schools. I think my concern there is around some of those schools that have perhaps in the past cherry-picked some of our children, those that weren't perhaps the most complex, and are therefore charging extortionate amounts of money, far exceeding the place provision funding that special schools are currently being asked to consider as part of the new matrix moving forward. So I think there is just a point there around what criteria will we be using to determine which children do go to those very, very specialist places. Because at the minute, I think there are certain establishments that are potentially taking the local authority for a ride, if that's not the most PC perhaps term, but I do think there are children placed in some schools that are charging extortionate amounts of money that perhaps their need could be met in the special school estate, where on the contrary there are some children within the special school estate that we are really struggling with, but are currently unable to perhaps move to some of these specialist schools because of the amount of money they're charging.
Thank you, Jodie. Okay, Councillor Buttery, would you like to come in, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to say, I mean, obviously, I agree with Jodie and with Helen at the moment. Excuse me a moment.
While we're
sorry.
Okay. Okay.
Sorry. So yeah, obviously I agree with Jodie and Helen. This is, as you're all aware, this is a historic situation we have in that when the EHCPs were brought in 2014, it wasn't managed properly. And as Helen's reflected, as a council, we weren't in a good state, and the work that's been done in the last 12 months has been phenomenal. I think absolutely the aspiration from the council is that all children are cared for and educated within borough. And as Paul will have reflected on many occasions, our special needs schools have been full to bursting point, and Jodie with all the tribunals and all the pain we've been through with those. I think, as Helen said, we now understand the children better, and it's been really encouraging over the last 12 months to have more schools coming on board without, you know, unfortunately, I've heard the phrase we can't meet needs a lot of times from mainstream schools, and that then there's been the push from some schools and parentally to push children into special schools, which has then meant we've got too many children in our special schools and we've had to go out of borough because we've been losing tribunals. So by changing the focus at this and putting the child back at the centre of this, they have to, the attention is that the majority of children will go to mainstream school because they live in a mainstream world. And that's what we've got to reflect. So we want to keep them in mainstream, and then if they do go to special school, there will always be a need for children. I'm not at all saying that we're going to cut special school places. I don't want that out there at all. We are not cutting special needs schools. We're not cutting special needs children's places. But what we are doing is making sure that the right children go to the right schools, and where we can, we will keep them in borough. And I recognise, Jodie, yeah, there are some schools that haven't perhaps met the right criteria, but we have been as a council in such a position that up until 12 months ago when Helen started doing this work, that we didn't have many options. But I think by rebalancing this now, it will be a long-term thing. This is not going to happen overnight. We're not suddenly going to pull children out of one school and send them to another or anything like that. This will be a graduated response. But I think this is the right approach that we need for our children in this borough. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. Rob McConaughey, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, obviously, I'm a massive champion of this whole thing, and I've been so impressed with Helen and all the vision and everything since it's come into place. And obviously, we've got an enhanced provision out of this over the last sort of 6 months at Horbush. My only query looking at the slides is for point 4 on the right hand side, it says educated in specialist classes but integrate with mainstream all of the times. But obviously that depends on the nature of what the enhanced provision is, because like my SEMH children, there's absolutely no way they could be integrated with my mainstream children. That's why they were permanently excluded from the other places in the first place. So I just wanted to raise that, and maybe the wording needs to be looked at. Thank you.
Yeah, and Sorry. And again, Rob, thank you for that. It's where we can, really. It's about, we don't want to be in a situation where we were May 2019, where we were told by inspectors that as a borough, we weren't aspirational enough for our children. I think it's where we can. It's about inclusion, as we've described all the way through this process, and where we can, with some of our children, we will. So where we can, there's additional support, but where we can integrate children, we will. But you're right, we will look at the wording, because as I said, for me, this diagram has to mean something to us all. It's not just about a diagram for the LA. It has to mean something for us all.
Thank you, Helen. I'm conscious we'll probably still have more of the presentation to get through. So if I bring Jody, did you want to come in quickly before I hand back over to Simon?
Yeah, thank you, Remley. Yeah, I just want to really agree with everything sort of Helen and Councillor Buttery has said. I just think it's really important that whilst we're looking really closely at that level 4, that enhanced provision, which is absolutely what we need in the borough, and the criteria around that, though, I just want to just make sure that point around if we're moving from stage 5 in terms of special school estate within Dudley, that we've got that real clear criteria that if that cannot be met within the special school estate, what that looks like as a criteria set before we do look at how to borough provision, or in borough perhaps more the Wenlock schools of that we're currently working with. I just think we need a little bit more clarity and consistency around that criteria, moving both from 5 to 4, but also within the 5 and potentially 5 to the 6.
Yeah. So can I just assure Jody, I totally agree with you, Jody. So definitely, and we need to do a bit more work regarding that. The other piece of activity as well that we have to do in parallel, which I know I've mentioned again in a number of arenas, is the work with parents and carers, because a lot of this we're governed by parental preference as well. So sometimes we have a view, schools have a view, and then parents have a different view, and that's the bit at the moment that doesn't match. So we've got to create confidence in the community. So as well as working together, schools and the LA and other partners, we've really got to work really hard with our parents to create that confidence. So again, that's something that we're working really hard on, but that is an absolute influence for us, particularly at the moment. And I know all of you will have had some experience of that as well. So I think that's really important to note.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you for all those comments. I'm going to hand back over to Simon to resume the presentation.
Thank you. So obviously all of that discussion around the vision of how we want the provision across Dudley to be graduated, we needed to actually understand what we need across Dudley as well, not just how we want it, but what we need. So as Helen mentioned earlier, at the start of the year, it was very, very difficult to even say how many EHCPs were active in Dudley. So what we have done now is pull together a detailed demand model, so that what we can actually do is have a better understanding of what the demands are going to be on the SEND system as a whole over the next 3 to 5 years. We've focused around being able to look at it by age. So as a 0 to 25 system, we can now look at data from all across that whole range. We can look by primary need, by township, so we can really get into the detail of when we're trying to look at the provision we need to deliver that graduated vision. We have the data to back it up, so we can make informed decisions around the child, where they are, what they need, age groups, things like that. What we have done with this, and it was referenced earlier and has been really helpful, is the DFE's management action plan template that was brought out a couple of weeks ago. So within there's a lot of context around the challenges, the engagement, but there's a lot of detail in there around what the demand is going to be for places over the next 5 years. So this links very strongly into that. And I think the other key piece being that within the finance recovery plan that Laura's going to be going through shortly, there is a very specific element in there around demand management. What this is looking at, and tied back to the key elements around the criteria for the different levels, is getting the balance across that graduated provision right. So getting the balance of the right children in special schools, and as Councillor Burry says, the right children in the right place. So all this data then feeds into the finance recovery plan that Laura is going to be going into shortly. But it is something that is new to Dudley. A lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of work has gone into this, and we're now in a position where we can move this forward as an ongoing tool. So it's not a one-off exercise, it's part of standard practice ongoing for Dudley. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail around the actual data, but it's just to, as an example, say it takes into consideration new plans, existing plans and closed plans. So it does look at the flow through the SEND system for Dudley. It does look at 0 to 25, so it's the whole picture. It does look at post 16, post 19. There's a lot of work around the preparation for adulthood as well. As mentioned earlier, it maps against the need, age, location, the support, and it supports the place planning, and it projects up to 5 years in the future. And it is an ongoing model, and it is all part of the DFE action plan. So when we're looking at utilising this template within the programme, it is something that we're going to be revisiting on an ongoing basis to monitor the accuracy of the forecasting, looking that we're on the right track, that we're having the right impact. So again, that's just a very, very quick underpinning of a lot of work that has been done to give the foundation of information to deliver that graduated approach to provision to support the children. Any questions before I hand over to Laura? No, over to you, Laura.
Okay, can I have the next slide, please, Simon? Right, so this is the high needs block forecast prior to any management actions. So we've actually discussed this previously in the meeting. So what this is now is a 7-year plan ranging from this financial year to 26-27. And you can see on here that prior to management actions, if we do nothing, we end 26-27 with a deficit of 70.2 million. So what I want to do is just summarise for you the assumptions that are included within that 70 million. So we've looked at all of our existing education, health and care plans. We've looked at EHCPs that are currently under assessment. We've put a forecast in for growth for 21-22 of 5% and then 2.5% year on year thereafter. We have put pay inflation at averaging at 3% year on year, and we've put protection in there for the teachers' pay and pensions for special schools and for alternative provision. What we've also done is made some assumptions based on potential costs arising from tribunals. So we've tried to factor that in over the 7-year period. The funding matrix that Rebecca fed back on earlier, just to be really clear, this is stage 1 of the funding matrix. It will be reviewed annually, and it's something that will take considerable more work as the months go on. But what you'll see there is a cost that we've put in of £2.1 million. And the way that's broken down is it's the 1.7 million that Rebecca referred to earlier for mainstream and £350,000 to support special schools to assist them with the provision-led funding. So we've also made an assumption within the figures around ESFA funding that we will receive in the future. So what we've said is that after 22-23, we will receive an increase year on year of 2.5%. So that's built into the figures and the assumptions around the £70 million. Can I have the next slide, please, Simon? Right, so this is now the plan, including management actions. So just to be really clear, there's two scenarios in here. One assuming that the disapplication goes ahead and one assuming that it doesn't, so that we're representing both views here and both scenarios dependent on the outcome. So the same pressures and income that I've referred to on the previous slide are included here, but halfway down the slide you'll see the management actions. So Rebecca earlier referred to 57 million, so I'll try and explain what that is. What you can see is from 2021 we are saying that we will save 2.7 million, and that rises to 11.9 million by 26-27. If you add up all of those savings over all of those years, that equates to approximately £57 million. So what that does, if you take the disapplication proposal into consideration as well on this model, is that reduces the pressure on the previous slide of £70 million down to a deficit forecast of 13.1 million by 26-27. What I've also done, and I referred to it earlier in the report that I presented, is put the current position for the early years block and the central school services block on this slide, so that you can see how that alters the forecast position on the high needs block if we take those reserve balances into consideration. And you can see that if we do the disapplication by 26-27, that 13.1 million is then reduced to 11.6. And if we don't do the disapplication, that is a deficit position that's forecast of 18.2 million by 26-27. So can I have the next slide, please, Simon? So this is the management actions, the proposed actions in more detail. So this is the £2.7 million this financial year, rising to the 11.9 million. And the last management action that you can see on there, the demand management, is what Simon referred to on his slides. And like I say, if you add all of those up individually for each year, you arrive at the £57 million that's factored into the plan. And the next slide, Simon, thanks. That summarises what I've just said. Now, obviously, there was a lot of numbers there and a lot of data, so I don't know whether people want me to go back over anything or whether you've got any questions associated with those numbers, because there's some big numbers on those slides.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Let's pause for some questions. I see a hand up. I just need to see who that is. Chris, over to you.
Laura, is the 57 including the disapplication as well?
No, it isn't. No, just to be really clear, that 57 million are the management actions, excluding the disapplication.
So just quick, I could be wrong. I just quickly added it up on my calculator. It comes to 50 mil. But so I was trying to do it quickly while you were presenting.
Yeah, yes, yeah. So actually, just thinking about that, you are right. The 57 million is the management actions plus the disapplication. You are right. Sorry, my apologies. I'm trying to do it without seeing the slide in front of me. Yeah, it is. It includes that as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions for Laura? Okay, we have another question coming in from Jody Colburn.
Hi Laura, I'm just wondering, is there any plans or intentions to speak to the DfE in regarding the number of specialist school placements within the borough? My understanding is that that is obviously the number registered with the DfE is considerably lower than the actual number of places that are currently being taken at the moment. And would that not surely bring in additional income if that number was increased?
Helen, I don't know whether you want to help answer that question.
Helen, if you would
unmute.
Sorry, I can't believe I've done it again. I don't normally do it twice. Do it once, but not twice. I think that's something we probably need to go away and just have a think about, Jodie, before we can answer that, because I don't think we've really looked at that in any detail, but it is definitely something to consider.
Okay, so I know, Helen, it's been something that's been raised sort of through the Special School Forum for a number of years.
Yeah.
The number 697 comes off the top of my head, but that might be incorrect. But I know that is certainly considerably lower than the number of special school placements that we have at the moment. And based on kind of Councillor Buttery's contribution around not reducing numbers in specialist schools, if actually that clearly represented the number of spaces we have and the funding we require, I don't know. I'm not an accountant. I don't know how much money that would bring in, but I certainly think it would help. In the current situation.
Yeah, and I think it's something we've considered in terms of taking advice on, because we did change our approach this year as a local authority, but that wasn't with DfE consideration. So yes, we will take that away, Jodie.
Okay, thanks, Helen. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Paul Lation, please.
Thank you.
Paul, if you would just unmute, please.
Sorry, Chair. Thank you. Can I just thank Helen and all the finance team and everybody who's been involved with this. There's a tremendous amount of work gone into this, obviously. But there's an awful lot of suppositions and assumptions regarding the EHCPs. For a start, 5% for 2021-22, and then that will decrease to 2.5% per annum from 22-23 onwards. What I'm afraid of is that Dudley will go back into what it used to do when they had statements for children, in that Dudley would say, there is no more money in the pot because you can't have a statement because there's no more money in the pot for children. What I don't want to see is children being disadvantaged because EHCP money isn't available, and that rather than it being a decrease in forecast growth, it's actually plateaus or even increases.
Simon, are you coming in on that?
Yeah, and Helen will probably back. So when we're looking at the demand data over the last year, a lot of work's been done on practice as well within the SEND team, and it may sound cold, but what we look at is the actual flow through the system. So Dudley has had a very strong input into providing EHCPs, but not necessarily managing the EHCPs through the full life cycle of the process. So when you're seeing a reduction, what we've done in the demand planning is look historically at the volume of increase year on year since 2014, but also taking into consideration the changes in practice to bed in the code of practice properly over the last year, around annual reviews, around making sure that the children are placed in the right provision to receive the right support. So when we actually look at that, what you're looking at as the 5% and the 2.5% is the net increase to the service being properly managed, so that what you'll see over the next 18 months is you'll still see an increase as the service then starts addressing managing annual reviews properly and the flow through the system. Does that help at all?
I know Jeremy's got his hand up, but just jumping on that, I mean, Paul, you're right. We've agonised over these percentages, and we've really, as Simon said, we've really spent some time looking at the flow. But this is about managing children effectively on EHCPs as well. You know better than me, there is as a SEND system, we haven't supported children effectively at annual reviews, etc. This is about ensuring that we are supporting children effectively whilst they're on an EHCP. And again, this is about ensuring the right children are on an EHCP as well. Because when we've looked at some of our children, they should never have been put on an EHCP, if that makes sense as well. So for me, it's about really understanding the system and making sure that the system works. But it's about children, as we've said, receiving the right support on the right plan as well, if that makes sense. So I'm just going to bring Jeremy in because he had his hand up.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing just to say is that it is always sometimes an automatic assumption that EHCP means special school. And one of the things that we're looking, as you refer back to the key principles I talked about earlier, is that continuous system. And if our system and our mainstream schools are supported, there's no reason why more children, not the more complex ones, obviously, but those who can have their needs met, can have their needs met in mainstream. So it doesn't necessarily mean more EHCPs, more money. If we manage them, as Helen and Simon have both said, a lot of EHC children can survive and thrive very, very successfully in mainstream. So there's not that automatic assumption. If you've got an EHC, you have to go to a special school. I think that point just needs making clear.
Thanks, Jeremy. Paul, did you want to come back? Your hand is still up.
No, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Helen and Jeremy, for those points, and they have been noted.
Thank you. Okay, I've got Manny Keeley, please.
Thanks, Chair. Can I just first of all thank colleagues for the level of detail that's been provided in the plan. It's certainly very comprehensive. I just want to follow on from the points that Paul made regarding assumptions. So notice the final bullet point is that this disapplication confirms for 1% for the next 3 years. So presumably there will be a plan for the next 3 years to have this conversation about the 1%. But it goes back to the number of EHCPs, and I believe there was some conversations about ceasing EHCPs for various individuals over the coming years, and figures were quoted in the budget working group about the plan to reduce various numbers. And then also the conversations about the new banding matrix, the 1 to 7 scale. I'm presuming that's going to be discussed at some point, maybe perhaps not in this meeting, but at a future meeting, because we got to see those a week ago. So just going back to the number of EHCPs and the question specifically about the intention to reduce or cease the number of EHCPs that may in previous years have incorrectly, I hate to say that, but perhaps incorrectly awarded. I don't know whether that's Helen or Simon.
Yeah, Manny, we have, as I've said, I think if I'm right in thinking that I've kind of read your question properly, it's about making sure that the right children have got an EHCP predominantly within this. Is that what you mean, Manny?
Yes, it is, because there was a conversation I had last week about reducing EHCPs, and numbers were quoted, which I've written down.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is about the right children being on an EHCP, and to avoid drift as well. So we have got a group of children that we have ceased. So there's a lot of, it's a very long process. There's a lot of legal implications. It's not straightforward. There's permissions as well that we need to take, but we have started to cease EHCPs appropriately. And I've got to really emphasise that because I don't want it to be seen that, you know, we're on a mission to reduce. This isn't about been on a mission to reduce. This is about doing the right thing for our children and making sure, as I said right from the outset, that we are aspirational, because we know that, you know, we need to be aspirational for our children. We need to ensure that that they have the options in order to really progress into adulthood. So again, there's a whole heap, there's a number of things that we have to consider, hence why we've agonised over those percentages. And I think the biggest thing this evening that I really want everybody to take away is about reviewing. So we've been in a position, I think, as a borough, where these processes or these systems have been here for years, and we've never reviewed the system. We've talked about the funding matrix. That's never been changed for about 10 years. So this is quite a big shift. This is quite a big milestone change for Dudley. But what we will build in is a review point, because we know we won't get this right straight away. So again, we talked about the funding matrix, we've talked about it at budget working group, we've talked about reviewing that next year, because we know that we'll keep having to keep revisiting it as well to make sure that it fits well, it sits well, and most importantly that you have the tools in order to support the children that are presented to you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Helen. I've got Councillor Budry and then Tony to come in.
Okay, I'll make it brief because I know everybody's getting tired now, but really just to assure the teachers that EHCPs, we want, like Helen and Jeremy said, we want the right children on the right plan. And actually, there has been an assumption in the past, and I know some parents have been encouraged to take out EHCPs or to pursue that direction, because they automatically assume the child will then get a place at special school. And this is not the case. Actually, the majority of our children, we've got about 2,500 children on EHCPs, but about 700 are in special school. So, you know, we have more children in mainstream school than we do in special school anyway. But I think also when we're looking at our child, we're looking at our children, not just as children, like Helen said, but into adulthood. Actually, it's good if we can encourage the parents that if their child can come off EHCP, because when you're looking at future careers, if you know, for all of those who work with years 10 and 11, 12 and 13, if a child has got an EHCP, that can actually be hugely detrimental to their future career prospects. So if they need that EHCP, absolutely, they need to have that. But if we can work in such a way that they can come off those, actually that's a real thing to celebrate, I would say, and to make sure that those children are managing. Because if you look at the statistics of children who are on EHCPs and actually in work, it's horrific. It's about 6%. It's really, really poor. So this is about the whole journey, their whole lives, not just their time in education, but this is making sure that they are ready for the rest of their lives and that they are employable and they can have a really good, and fulfill their potential in life. I do fully appreciate there will be some children who will always need 24-hour care, and we will absolutely make sure that those provisions are in care, are in place. But for the majority of our children, there's dignity in work, and I think that should be our aspiration for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Buttery. Tony, did you want to come in? Then I have Angela.
Yes, if that's okay. It's a couple of things really. I suppose it's about reminding everyone. I think Simon talked about the graduated approach, and very clearly in the SEND Code of Practice, it does talk about the graduated approach. So supporting children very much in SEND support, because there are many children at SEND support level that are managed really perfectly well and supported with the schools, so that the right children then come on to EHCPs and then they're supported within the mainstream, because again, within the Code of Practice, it's the presumption around around mainstream, so really fitting in well with the educational principles that Jeremy talked about. But the other thing around EHCPs, it's actually about partnership working, so it's not all about education funding all of this, and it's important for us to work across the partnership to encourage both health and social care to support us in that journey, very much so as they go into adulthood, so from 14 onwards, the post 16 and post 19, very much thinking about those young people. Why do they need to be on an EHCP? Because real life doesn't have a plan in that way, and we need to support families and those young people have a voice into preparation for adulthood so that they can get the right fit going forward. So the plans are statutory, there's not much we can do about that, but what we can do differently is when they are coming through, trying to understand how we can support the schools much more comprehensively going forward.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you. Angela?
Hi, it's just to say, first of all, thank you to all the LA personnel, really, who's given us such detailed information, and that's been put together in quite tight timescales, and that's really welcomed and appreciated. So thank you. I don't know whether I should have asked this question earlier on, but I'm just going to ask a question which relates back to page 8. So I know we've talked previously at Schools Forum about the financial recovery plan, but this is specifically to the high needs block. So in that, it does refer to the unmet savings from the recovery plan of 0.911 million. So I just wondered if somebody could elaborate a little bit on that as to what that was. And obviously, as we're going forwards with predictions and things that have been provided for today, that figure doesn't appear anywhere. But also, I would imagine that because we're not predicting for that to happen again. And I think that's a real concern as a Stourbridge School representative of other heads of, if you like, that a guarantee of some description that won't be happening again. So it's just really to unpick. Can anybody respond to what that 0.911 million refers to? And in this context, obviously, it's quite a significant sum.
Thanks, Angela. So this is on page 8, paragraph 16, I believe, 16A. Laura, would you like to come in on that?
Yeah, of course. So yeah, I'll explain what the 911 relates to. So that was a savings target originally for the CCG was much greater than we've basically reviewed it and confirmed what is actually realistic now. So originally we had a much higher savings target, so that accounts for about half of that. The other is around exceptional funding, savings and ceasing. When we first put this on the table at Schools Forum earlier this year, we anticipated that all sort of secondary schools would cease from the 1st of April and all primary from the 1st of September. And as the year's gone on, particularly in primary, it has become apparent, and Tony or Helen, you can go into more detail on this, that we haven't been able to cease as many as anticipated. Okay. I don't know whether anybody wants to add to that.
Thank you, Laura. Anyone else to come in? Tony?
Sorry, yeah, I was just going to come in and through around the ceasing process. I mean, we are finding young people all the time through the system, and to ensure that we don't do drift and delay, we are working very much around following the ceasing process. And as Helen said before, it is a process, and we have to be very clear as legally, you know, we'd be on the wrong side of the law, and we don't want to do that. But very much as part of the post-16 work, we are looking at destinations a lot earlier and doing some predictions about where we think young people will go, so that we can get ready to make sure that those plans can lapse if it's appropriate for them to lapse. We've got a number of young people that have gone to university, so you know, you sort of think, why did they have a plan in the first place? But we're making sure that plans are being lapsed at the appropriate time and ceased at the appropriate time, because they're two different processes.
Thank you for that. That was helpful. Thank you, Tony. Okay. Right, we're back on to presentation. Simon, are you carrying on with consultation feedback?
Yes.
Yeah, so
okay. You
go on,
doing
Helen.
this, Simon? Go on, you do it then.
I do the numbers, you can do the intelligent stuff.
Okay,
So
okay.
the consultation ran from the 28th of September to 6th of November. We did hold 2 consultation events where we had 32 people attend. There was a total of 21 questions raised either directly through email at the consultation events, which were all logged and circulated to everyone on the consultation list. Now, the next section, in the original feedback to budget working group, there was a very high level analysis done on the responses. When I then went back to revisit, identified some lovely Excel challenges, but in detail, we don't have it down to individual school by name, but what we do have is by types of whether chair of governors, head teacher of academies or maintained schools, etc. Now, interestingly, we did have 89 responses. We did actually have 3 yeses supporting the disapplication and 1 no opinion, but it does still leave with 95.5% did decide no to going ahead with the disapplication through that consultation process. So just a few pieces of feedback. So that as mentioned earlier, there were some key themes around unclear on how the transfer will address the funding challenges, concerns around direct impact to individual schools, unclear on calculations and how that's worked, and unclear on how it will improve the services. Now, when I looked at the yeses, there was some comment in there around, even though it was detrimental to that school specific budget, it was understanding that this is a borough responsibility, this is a system responsibility, and it then comes back to the whole conversation in earlier slides, I think, where we're trying to fix the system, aren't we, Helen? And it's about getting the right child on the right plan in the right place and being able to look at it in a way that is making it as close as possible financially sustainable. So going back to a previous question just now, I think the difference between the plan now and the plan from earlier on the year is the effort and time that's gone in to make the assumptions as robust as possible by knowing the children in the borough, what they need, where they need it. So I don't know if you want to expand on that whole consultation, Helen.
No, I think you've described that on the last 2 slides. So what we wanted to do is just give you a feel of the feedback and the comments that have come through. But in reality, that's the end of the presentation. There will be a lot more questions, I'm sure. There's still a lot more information. We've still got some unanswered questions as well, because as I've described 12 months ago, this is a huge system change. We can't underestimate the journey we're all on at the moment. But I do want to say this is about a collaboration. This is about us working together, which is what I've said again right from the beginning. We'll continue to work together. We have got to try and repair the high needs deficit. We can't ignore it. And as it stands, I'm quite clear that it's not just the LA's responsibility to repair the system. This is about us doing this together. So really, that's all we've got this evening. We will continue to keep sharing the information here. It keeps growing. And I think, as I said at the beginning, we've started a system to try and do that as well. So it's ongoing.
Oh, Helen, just to let you know, you're breaking up slightly. But
okay, if my network's not great.
Thank you.
I think my laptop's exhausted. Sorry.
Yeah, it's that time of night.
It is.
Okay, so we've had quite a few questions and comments and reflections made throughout the course of the presentation, but there's an opportunity now for any final questions or comments before we move on to ascertain individual members of School Forum's view. So Paul Asham, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Could I ask that the slides be made available to forum members so that we can digest them at our leisure?
I'm happy for that.
Fine. Okay, Helen's happy for that. So we can get those out. I think it's important to make it clear to everyone that we do need to proceed to a vote on this evening. There is a deadline, and I'll have my officials correct me if I'm wrong. Stacey, Laura, Helen. I believe that this application, if it does go through, needs to be made on Thursday. So we do need to get a view of each forum member this evening.
That's correct, yeah.
Thank you. Further questions or points of clarification, comments from anyone before we move to that vote? Okay, Rebecca.
Hello, I know I raised this at Budget Working Group, and it cannot be denied that we do need to pull together to do this. However, what's the contribution of early years and what's the contribution from post-16 to this deficit? Thank you.
So that's a question.
Okay, is that an explanation again, Laura, about how it works in terms of high needs? Because we are factoring early years and post-16 into this, aren't we?
Yeah, so on the sort of the management actions that we've put forward, the demand management will include 0 to 25 as part of that process. So there will be savings factored in as part of the management actions that will affect all sectors. And I think that's the way I responded at Budget Working Group. I don't know whether anybody's got any other questions around that or want to add to my comment.
I wonder if there's, sorry, Rebecca, go ahead, please, Rebecca.
I think the question I'm asking is, if we go for this application, our mainstream schools are having to contribute potentially 1% of their budgets to this. So are all other people contributing 1%? I know the funding doesn't work like that. However, as was suggested on Budget Working Group, it's gifting this money. So is anybody else doing that in any other sectors? Always, and I know it's about the funding, I know it's about how you can get the funding from us, but it does seem it always falls to those sectors to fund this.
Yeah. No, it is a valid point when it comes to the disapplication, because you are right, it is only affecting sort of schools. However, like I've said, on the management actions and the savings that are put forward as part of demand management, and also the ceasing that was referred to earlier, that will affect all sectors, including post-16 and early years. Helen, is there anything else that you want to add to that?
No, and just that what you said, I suppose that predominantly the improvement journey does include early years and post-16, so that there is a lot of work going on in both of those arenas that might not be as open here, if that makes sense. So there is a lot of work going on that we'll be able to, over a period of time, communicate that through as well.
Thank you, Helen. Joe? Joe Higgins.
Thank you. I think, as has been said many times this evening, you know, I really applaud the vast amount of work that's gone into shaping this plan. I think it's a shame that it's come so late. I understand the pressures everyone is under, and I think there's a real sense of, you know, commitment to partnership and a commitment to really developing the inclusion strategy for this borough. I think there are lots of questions at this very late time, you know, in the year, a couple of days to go before we make the decision. And I think a lot has been said about young people in mainstream with EHCPs. And I think we need to factor in the huge challenges, unprecedented challenges we face at the moment with COVID, and the supply agency costs are absolutely rocketing out of control. So when we look at what it means for individual schools. You know, some schools would have to actually submit around 70 to 80,000 pounds of their funding. It's significant at a time when it isn't affordable. And if, of course, schools face considerable pressures, then quality first teaching suffers, and the kind of totality of the experience in mainstream significantly affects those young people on EHCPs. So I think it's very early days where we are just coming to grips with this comprehensive plan. It's a positive shift, but in my view, we also need to take into consideration, you know, 95% of the respondents are a no.
Thank you, Joe. Chris?
I think just to follow on from Joe there, I think the one thing also to consider is, albeit we've had a growth in the funding formula for this year's income, we've also haven't had any award funding for the Teachers' Pay Award, as well as obviously the NJC Pay Award as well. So on one hand, we've had extra funding in schools, but it's pretty much come in the one hand and gone out the other without actually having any real benefit to the kids.
Thank you, Chris. Okay. I don't see any other hands raised. I'll just pause to just make sure that we have concluded the questions and comments. So I think we can now move to a vote, and I have been requested to go through our list for this vote, so that it can be recorded appropriately and accurately. Karen, I don't know if Helen or Laura want to make any final comments, but as I understand it, in terms of the logistics of this vote moving forward, we vote now, and then there's a few days before the disapplication process needs to be made, if that is to the way that we are going to proceed.
Yeah. So, Chair, can I just say on that point? Yes, we'll take. There'll be no decision this evening. I'll take it away, and then we'll make a decision, and then we'll communicate that to everybody in the next 24 to 48 hours.
Thank you so much for that clarification. So the view of school forum will be taken into consideration, and we will be informed in the next few days. Thank you for that. Angela, is that a final question? I see your hand is up.
Yeah, it was just in respect of in the information for schools forum, it says to give a view to the acting director when we're being asked to vote. So are we giving a view rather than
okay, well, thank you for that. We is my understanding that we actually need each person to give a view whether or not we support the disapplication. So perhaps vote isn't the correct word. Karen or one of the official officers, would you like to clarify?
Yes, Chair. Forum's being asked whether they support.
So we do need to go through each individual to say whether or not you support. Yes, you support. No, you don't. Is that correct, Karen?
Yes, Chair.
And would abstentions be appropriate? No opinion?
Yes, Chair. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so you've got three possibilities. Yes, you support, no, or no opinion. Does that answer your question, Angela?
Yes, it does. Just to make the point that obviously those of us who are representing townships have already sought representation from our other 13, in my case, 13 colleagues. So it isn't my personal view. It's a view across those 13 schools.
That's very helpful, Angela. Thank you. Okay. I have the membership list in front of me, and I think I'll go through it in that order. So if I can just call each individual. Unfortunately, we've had a few colleagues had to leave the meeting, but we'll go through and just see who is here one by one. So may I begin with Alison Ward, please?
No.
Rob McConomy?
No. Sorry, no.
That's a no. Okay. Christine Finnegan?
No.
Sarah Riley?
No.
Angela Hannaway?
No.
Brian Rowe?
No.
Jill Belcher?
No.
Gareth Burton had to leave the meeting, I believe. Yes, Gareth, I believe, had to leave. Alison Watson, we've had apologies. Jodie Colburn.
No.
Paul Lation.
No.
Mark Moody.
No.
Sally Bloomer.
No.
Christopher Affinity. I don't know if he is still with us.
No, Chair, I think he's left the meeting.
No, okay, thank you. Chris Christoforo.
No.
Joe Higgins.
No.
Rebecca Cox.
No.
Rob Dunn. Is Rob still with us?
He is, Chair, he's just on mute.
Oh, yes, he is. Rob, if you're on mute, please. Rob, could we ask you to unmute and give us your view? Okay, yes, Rob is in. Karen, can you see his responses in the chat? He can't unmute. It's a
yeah,
no.
that's a no. Okay.
Okay,
No,
Manny Keeley. Did I hear Manny? Could you just repeat that,
No.
Manny? No, thank you, thank you. Brendan Oakley, I don't know if Mr. Oakley is here tonight. I don't think so.
No, Chair.
No. Matthew Minot.
No.
Victoria Howard. Victoria's not here, I don't think. Alice Middleton, I believe.
Chair, sorry.
Oh, sorry, we haven't.
Sorry, Chair. Mr. Durham is here. He's raising his hand, so he may be here for Mrs. Howard.
Yes.
Evening, Chair. My vote is yes.
And you're representing, is it?
I'm the substitute for Vicky Howard for
Vicky Howard, thank you. I'm sorry we didn't mention that at the start. We normally mention substitutes at the start, Mr. Durham, but thank you for that. Karen, is that noted?
Yes, it is, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Alice Middleton, I believe, had to leave the meeting. So Tim Reed.
No.
Karen Clatworthy is not here, I don't think.
No, Chair.
No, and then finally for me, I'm afraid I'm the one dissenting yes. Okay, Karen, everything noted?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. On our agenda, colleagues, we do have, as we always do, a verbal update from the Children's Directorate, and I don't think there is much to update this evening, Helen, no. So nothing to say there. Okay, so just to reiterate, I really want to thank everyone for very thorough presentations, questions very well answered comprehensively. Thank you, Rebecca, in particular, for your very useful feedback from Budget Working Group and everyone's participation in what was, I think, a really complex matter we have here moving forward, but we've had a range of really important views aired. So I just want to thank everyone for your participation this evening. And with that, a very long meeting for us all this evening. I believe we're meeting next in January. Karen, is that correct?
Yes, Chair, on the 26th of January.
Right. Seems in the world of COVID, I certainly live day by day. So it seems amazing to think that by the time we meet again, the holidays will have come and gone. But I do wish you all the best. I hope you all stay well and look forward to seeing you in January. And I think we can conclude the meeting there. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.